Good Monday afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the final Southern Oregon Weather Weekend Update of 2020. I'll start by talking about our snowpack and water situation, then we'll discuss our 7-day forecast, and finish by reviewing our January outlook. So this map shows that we've seen largely average precipitation amounts over Jackson County and the Rogue Valley over the past 30 days. However, the bulk of that rainfall has come in the past 2 weeks. We've seen pretty much 150% of average rainfall over the Rogue Valley over the past 2 weeks, and that's given our snowpack a boost. But it hasn't really done much to make up for our water storage deficit. Here you can see that the reservoirs in Jackson County are really running quite a bit below average, and some of these are in the single digits. Look at Emigrant Lake, only 2% full. So it's going to take quite a bit of rain to make up for that deficit. And it looks like we will see some pretty healthy amounts of rain over the next 10 days or so, but I don't think it will go a very long way just yet toward making up for some of these deficits. As far as our snowpack goes, the picture is not too far from average for this time of year. This smooth light green line is average for snow water equivalent, meaning the amount of water that is in the snowpack. And this black line is the year so far. I've also plotted some of the other years on this chart that we've talked about previously, some of the analogs like 2011, 2012, that's this pink line, and then some of the most recent years, because we also want to consider climatology, what's happened recently, and that's this dark green line and this gray line here. And you can see so far we're outperforming all of those, which is a good sign. And I think we could continue to climb a little higher here over the next 10 days, as we'll see some pretty stormy weather before maybe leveling off a little in mid-January during a drier period that we've been pinpointing for a little while. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So here's our current 500 millibar situation. We have this low that's departing our area and heading into the Four Corners. We have some blocking over Greenland here. That's going to be a good sign for cold a couple days to a week down the road. You have a big Aleutian low here, and that's going to push a little bit farther east in the coming days and connect and form really a healthy trough in the Gulf of Alaska, extending all the way down the Pacific coast in the day 7 to day 10 time frame, so we'll talk about that. But you can see here, to start the week, for today and tomorrow, we're looking a little bit drier. That trough moves into the Four Corners and is replaced by a ridge, so that's going to give us a day or two, today and tomorrow, with pretty dry weather. However, you can see that this area of low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska is sending systems our way, and the first of those is going to arrive late Wednesday into Wednesday night. And that's going to be the first in a series of systems that will give us a shot of rain pretty much every other day or so. And some of these systems are looking pretty robust, and I think are really going to be able to give our mountain snowpack a boost. You can see here by this weekend, this is 10 a.m. on Sunday morning, that area of low pressure has broadened and deepened and is now extending all along the west coast. And this is a very nice pattern for mountain snow and valley rain. But what I'm afraid could happen with this pattern farther down the road into mid-January is that this area of blocking over Greenland tends to promote a trough underneath, and then what can happen is this ridge over Hawaii currently can shift a little bit farther east into the southwest, and this trough can retreat again toward the Aleutians farther west here. And that could lead to some ridging over our part of the country. But that's down the road. For now, we have this situation to look forward to if you like snow and valley rain during the wintertime. So here is the simple picture over the next 7 days. This is from the Weather Channel. Again, I like to show you their forecast because they use a proprietary algorithm that gives the most weight to computer models that have performed the best over the recent weeks. And Cliff Mass, who's a University of Washington professor of atmospheric sciences, has ranked some of these weather outlets, and in a couple blog posts he's shown that the Weather Channel really does outperform a lot of other outlets, including the National Weather Service actually, So they do a very, very good job. And charts like this are very easy to interpret. So you can see our dry period to start the week, and then we start seeing chances of rain with that first trough that's going to be the first in a series of systems that are going to give us a chance of rain really every other day or so. And you can see our weekend is looking pretty wet at this point as well. So I think the main reason for our coming wet weather is that the MJO is going to move into phases 2 and 3. It's been in this null phase, this circle of death here, as they like to call it, where it doesn't have that much of an influence, but once it starts getting outside of this circle, it starts to pack a little bit more of a punch. And phases 2 and 3 are pretty wet phases and cold phases for this time of year. Here's temperature on the left, precipitation on the right. These are the correlations that we'd expect with these phases, and you can see phase 2 is pretty cool, not very wet, but phase 3 is both cool and wet. So that lines up well with what the computer models are showing as of right now. And in fact, you can see if we move past the 7-day time frame into days 8 and 9, that trough has deepened even more. And if you like snow, like I do, this is a very, very welcome pattern to see. But like I mentioned, this blocking over Greenland can tend to promote troughing in the southeast, and what can happen is this trough along the west coast can retreat. This is more of a positive EPO type pattern with ridging to the south and the trough retreating up toward Alaska, and that can give us some drier weather during the middle of January. Really, that's not entirely unusual. I can remember several years where I went skiing in the middle of January, even toward MLK weekend, where the snowpack was quite low and it was pretty warm. So it's not unusual to have our mid-January and late January be pretty dry. But let's talk about our analogs as we get toward the end of this video, because they have also been hinting at kind of a mid-January dry spell. So this is the sea surface temperature configuration that we get if we blend our top 3 analogs together. You can see the La Nina, warmer water in the Gulf of Alaska, and warmer water in the eastern Indian Ocean versus cooler water in the west. And you can see that our current sea surface temperatures are still pretty similar to that. La Nina, warm water in the Gulf of Alaska, and the trend has been for cooler water to develop along the coast of Africa here and warmer water to show up near Australia. And I'm not showing you that trend here. This is just the sea surface temperature anomaly map. But just know that is the trend. And the reason I like that is because warmer water in the eastern Indian Ocean tends to promote convection here, so thunderstorms. And that puts the MJO generally in phases 3, 4, and sometimes 5 over here. And those are cooler and wetter phases for our part of the country during the winter time. So that's why we like what's happening in the Indian Ocean. So if you recall, those 3 analogs blended together gave us a December picture that looked like this, ridging over the west coast, more trough and stormy look in the east. And you can see that's not too far off from what we've actually seen during the month of December. Ridge over the west and trough over the east. However, the exception has been, the key difference has been that this ridge has been centered more over the northern plains, and we've still been able to come under the influence of this trough in the Gulf of Alaska, because the ridge isn't upstream of us, it's actually downstream. And so it hasn't been able to prevent some of these systems from coming through. So it's interesting because subtle differences in the pattern like that can actually have really big effects. So going forward into January, our analogs would suggest this kind of a picture, with this ridge still hanging around in the southwest, but the trough being able to push in a little bit more effectively. And this is kind of a transitional pattern that suggests that we could have some stormy periods and some drier periods, and I think that's exactly what our January is going to end up looking like. I think we're going to start the month pretty cold and wet, and then have a drier period during mid-month before we transition back to potentially a wetter and stormier period very end of the month into February. And here you can see the potential for that drier period mid-month setting up. Again, this Greenland block leading to troughing underneath in the southeast, and this ridge nosing into the desert southwest. Again, this doesn't look like an entirely dry pattern because the ridge is pretty flat and the flow is pretty zonal. It's pretty west to east. and there's not that much amplification. But if we can get these heights to connect in this horseshoe pattern over the top, that could really reinforce the trough in the southeast and give us even drier and warmer weather. So hopefully that won't happen. Hopefully at most we'll see a pattern like this. So let's wrap up all of that information. Right now our snowpack is pretty close to average, but our reservoirs are quite empty. So we're going to need some pretty substantial rainfall over the next few months to make up for that. It looks like we'll have a dry start to the week, but then it's going to get progressively wetter. And really, on average, over the next 10 days, I think it's going to be pretty wet due to those cool and wet phases, MJO phases 2 and 3. And that wet pattern can persist through day 10, because even MJO phase 4 is pretty cool and wet. But then we start seeing some drier signals potentially for mid-January. And that could be because the MJO can continue to progress into phases 5 and 6. And those are drier and warmer phases. So far, our snowpack is thankfully outperforming our winter analogs and climatology, meaning those last few years, 19, 18, and 2020. But we still are looking at that dry period in mid-January, which could bring our snowpack down a little bit relative to average by week 4 or 5. So we'll have to see what happens. But for now, we can look forward to some rain and snow over the next 10 days. So thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget to set your notifications for the next weekend update, which will come in 2021. And please leave a like if you enjoyed the forecast.